Natalie Godec. I am a platform engineer at Babylon Health, dealing with AWS and GCP infrastructure, all the things Terraform, all the things deployment and configuration management.
Cool. Well, thanks for joining me today for our Women in Tech Q&A series. I guess just to kick off, could you tell us a bit about yourself and how you kind of got into a career in tech?
My path into a career in tech started when I was about 14 years old, and my parents asked me who I wanted to be. And since my mom was in tech, she was actually a systems engineer. I thought, well, she might help me if I go into the same kind of industry. So I decided tech. And then she brought me to her workplace, to her office, and piled a bunch of like circuits and computer details, like a tower details, in front of me and said, build a computer. She helped me, obviously. And I built it, and it didn't work. But it turned out it wasn't my fault. It was the memory card wasn't functional. But yeah, that's how it started. And then I obviously did lots of studies. I fluctuated between, I want to be a graphic designer, because that's tech as well, kind of. I wanted to be a security engineer, or I wanted to be a network engineer. And for the longest time, I wanted to be a network engineer, and I studied that for a long time. And then kind of very randomly, I got into DevOps. The story is I needed a project in the industry to do my master thesis, and the deadlines for the application were kind of coming up. And I started applying to just everything that was in the list of available projects, systems-wise, because everything out there is for software developers. So systems is a bit more difficult to come by. And so I applied, and I got an interview. It was in Switzerland, in Geneva, with a French-speaking bank, and my French was okay-ish, but I wasn't too comfortable. And then they were throwing all of these words during the interview, like, oh, you're going to do Puppet and configuration management, and we do a bit of OpenStack. And I was like, okay, yeah, sure, exciting. And I had no idea what any of that meant. But then I spoke to my best friend who had already worked in the industry, and he was like, oh my God, that's so amazing. You should definitely do that. And so I did, and I loved it, and I still do it.
As like a platform engineer then, could you, I guess you kind of touched on it a bit anyway, but could you kind of talk about the journey that you've been on from, I guess, the moment you took that job to where you are today?
So I did a year and a half kind of a graduate program in Switzerland in a private bank. And there I changed teams every 4 months. Doing all sorts of different stuff that is related to systems and kind of automation and configuration management. And then I moved to London and started working for Morgan Stanley in their core infrastructure team as a systems engineer as well. And there it was also about on-prem infrastructure and managing, I think, 70,000 servers with with a configuration management tool, and building automation and building new environments. There was a lot of push onto building more secure environments for more sensitive data. So we were doing that and trying to bring in a little bit of Docker, bring in a little bit of Kubernetes, if possible, because obviously it's a huge traditional bank, and so everything is kind of established, and you need to be very careful about what you bring in and how you actually introduce it into the existing infrastructure. So I was there for 2 years, and then I thought that I needed a different challenge. I wanted to do a little bit more of open source, a little bit more of tools that are standard in the industry, because that's where I started. When I started this graduate program in Switzerland, we were using Logstash and Kibana, Grafana, and Puppet, which was obviously, it was back in 2015. Puppet was pretty much the industry standard for configuration management. So I kind of had that quite close to my heart, and I wanted to go back to kind of that kind of open platform, go out and pick what the industry and the whole world is working on and try to implement it and build systems with that. So I joined Babylon Health as a platform engineer. I had never worked with cloud in production. I had touched a little bit, like we all do a course there, a little lesson there, have a play, but I've never actually worked with it on a day-to-day basis. And in Babylon, everything is in cloud. So that was a learning journey, and like it's very interesting. So I picked up quite quickly, and we were building very exciting things. So every day is a challenge.
How did you find that switch then, I guess, from going straight into cloud? Was it quite a steep learning journey, or how have you found that?
In terms of learning journey, I'm still learning. There's always new things to learn and bits of the infrastructure that I haven't touched before. So that's kind of always like that in our job. But at the end of the day, if you're working with automation tools and configuration management, it's just a different type of YAML file.
Right. Okay.
Pretty much DevOps engineering is YAML engineering. So there are similarities in terms of how you manage infra and how you try to have your platform consistent and have everything tested and have different environments. And like you first test, you never go in production, etc., etc. The principles of working and methods of working and how you try to design your system stay the same. Obviously, I had to learn a lot about how cloud works and how everything communicates with each other. It's very different. Yeah. And one thing that was very difficult and very different was changing the pace, because when you work for a huge organization, and also when you work with on-prem infrastructure, things are slower than when you work in a startup with a cloud. And that was like, I kind of had gotten used to the pace of things that I had during 2 years at Morgan Stanley. And like neither of the approaches is bad or better or worse than the other. It's just different. Yeah. So there I am joining the team at Babylon, where everyone is absolutely brilliant and everyone is working so fast. It took me, I think, 2 months to get used to the pace of cloud, of startup, of just go and do it, test it, in one day it's done. Let's go and fix it or deploy it or test it in the dev environment.
Yeah, I guess that's like kind of no matter what job you're in, if you move from like a big corporate to a startup, there are so many differences. It's kind of like completely starting again and learning like everything to do with a startup and how much faster things do move. It can be, that's a learning journey in itself, I guess.
Yes, definitely.
So what would you say are some of the key skills then that are needed for success in, I guess, DevOps and cloud infrastructure?
You need to know how to Google. You need to, I guess, it's a very creative industry for me, being a DevOps engineer, because you're faced with problems, all sorts of problems every day, and it's your job to find the solution to that problem. And especially if you work with open source tools, you have this whole world. I mean, CNCF has this diagram, the periodic table of open source tools, and it's massive and it's getting bigger and bigger every year. Quite an interesting place to look at if you're just starting out. And you have all the sorts of the tools at your disposal, and you can also modify them to your needs, or you can write your own scripts, because a lot of our job is automation. So you do need to know how to write scripts in Bash or Python, regardless of what kind of infrastructure you work with. But it's very interesting. I would say, like, knowing how to Google, knowing how to script, just simply automate, like you need to deploy a change, like run a command with 15,000 servers, or like delete 25 buckets from AWS. Like it's all scriptable. It's just a for loop, nothing crazy, nothing like software development, but you do need to know how to script. And problem solving. Yeah. Creative approach to problem solving, knowing where to look, how to approach a problem from all different angles is very important.
So you said, I guess you've worked kind of extensively with on-prem, and now you kind of specialize in cloud infrastructure. So could you kind of, I guess, talk about the main differences that you've noticed between the two?
It's often a very different skill set technically to work with on-prem and cloud. For instance, when I worked with on-prem, a lot of the skills that I had and practiced every day were Linux, command line, kind of Unix principles, and debugging and administering Linux boxes. Now I think I haven't debugged a Linux box in probably a year. Maybe I restarted a Jenkins box once, but that's it. With cloud, you have loads of services that are available in a managed way, where you just order the service to work, and you don't have to think about the deepest ends of the infrastructure. And that's the main difference. When you work with on-prem, even if you want to deploy, say, Kubernetes, you will have to know every single detail about how Kubernetes infrastructure works, how it's installed, how it interacts with, how different services interact with each other, how networking works, and even think about how will you deploy the network. So you will typically have a network team who deal with the switches and routers and all of the physical infrastructure of the network, and you will have to sit down with them and talk about subnets and IP ranges and which kind of switch or router will be on top of which rack in order to provide this kind of functionality or that kind of functionality that you will want to have in Kubernetes. Whereas when you're in the cloud, the likelihood of you being able to just say, oh, there is EKS, it's a managed Kubernetes cluster, I'll just do that. And everything is set up for you. You don't have to, or like equally GCP for people that are into data analysis. Airflow is a very popular open source tool, a community developed tool for data pipelines. And I think it's quite painful to manage. I've never managed it myself on-prem, but I've heard. And hence why we use Cloud Composer on Google Cloud, because it's a managed service and we just deploy it and everything is there.
So I guess, again, another kind of comparison, you've worked with both AWS and GCP. So I guess between those two, what are the main differences that you've noted?
In GCP, there are a lot of things that are available to you by default, such as logging and monitoring dashboards, kind of security encryption. By default, everything is encrypted. You don't even have to think about it. So those were the things that we noticed that we have to think about proactively in AWS. We need to think about logging. We need to think about where to store the logs, how to build dashboards for monitoring. Have we encrypted all of our EBS volumes? In GCP, everything is encrypted by default, and there are things that are just available to you by default, which is very handy. On the other hand, AWS provides you with such a huge ecosystem of tools and services that it allows you to build more perhaps custom things by combining the products that are available from them. And I think it's kind of unknown, or maybe like the AWS positions themselves as like a toolkit. They provide all of these various tools to engineers who want to play with low-level stuff. Whereas GCP is more user-friendly and kind of easier, I find, to learn than AWS.
Which would you say you prefer?
I prefer GCP.
Okay.
But I mean, as long as you work with like GCP to me is easier to learn because I started learning both at the same time, as in use in production and deploy new platforms on them. But GCP is a little bit easier to grasp and to become kind of comfortable to work with.
Okay, so obviously you've moved, your career's advanced from on-prem to now being more on cloud. So what advice do you have for others that maybe are currently working on-prem and are looking to maybe make a career change like you did and move on cloud?
If you have doubts, don't be afraid. All of the skills are transferable. Everything that the core principles of you being an engineer are transferable into the cloud, and you are still very valuable. The proof is that I had no experience and I got hired into a team who worked with cloud, and now I work with cloud. And if you want to learn and practice first, there are courses that are very good out there. I prefer, my favorite ones are on A Cloud Guru. There's loads of resources on and courses that are preparing you to certifications, and also just you can just take them like that. And also they have a really cool thing. Every month there is a very short video doing an overview of what's new or what's cool right now this month in AWS, GCP, and Azure. Those are very interesting to watch. And my other, like right now I'm doing a few courses on Pluralsight. They host, particularly for Google, they host Google's courses, and they are paired with labs which are linked to each module. So you have a few videos and then you do a lab. I find it very interesting and very nice to kind of practice the skill that you just learned, and then you kind of do a recap and they explain everything very well.
And do you think certifications are necessary to make the transition or not?
I didn't have any, and I still don't have any. Certifications I find in the industry are quite a disputable thing. A lot of people say that, if you have all of the certifications, it doesn't mean that you're a good engineer.
Yeah, I guess experience, it's potentially more about experience, right?
Yes, and just like really about you being an engineer, no matter what you work with. You could be an electrical engineer and still be able to transfer the skills into any kind of domain. But yeah, I mean, the courses are very good, and it's a good way to have a good basis of everything in the cloud, because because I started working with cloud in production and everything. And so I learned gradually the things that I needed for my day-to-day job. And sometimes find that I'm lacking that basis, that fundamental layer. So that's why I'm doing the courses now, to have the fundamental layer.
Cool. So I guess moving on slightly then, obviously we're kind of on the tail end of it now, but we've just been through like a global pandemic. And how would you say this has kind of impacted the role of the DevOps function in business?
I honestly don't think it's been impacted that much. Obviously, we're as important as ever because everybody is now working remotely, and more so the teams that are responsible for end user, like our laptops, our networks, VPN, and all that enables employees to work and do their job. But for us, I feel like we've always been working with servers that are somewhere out there, whether it's a data center, it can be in Singapore, or it's a cloud, and it's somewhere there next to London. You don't even know where they are. So for us, where we work from doesn't really change much. We've learned to collaborate better remotely, so like Slack is a savior. But yeah, I don't feel like our role has changed much, apart from obviously we still need to keep the infrastructure up and running.
Yeah, and I guess so moving past the pandemic, then do you think that I guess DevOps teams in businesses will kind of have more say in like how businesses are operating and things like that? Because obviously how businesses run is going to continue to change. I guess a lot of us will continue to work remotely, and yeah, do you think like this will impact the teams in I guess how you communicate and how you keep the DevOps team culture and things like that on a remote working basis?
Culture is a big thing actually. We do need to find ways to keep the culture up. And there are companies that have been remote forever, like HashiCorp are fully remote. So I guess we have lessons to learn from them. And we always hope that we will have more say. Since the beginning of times, because we're very important. I mean, if we mess up or there's not enough resources and something happens with the infrastructure, the business suffers greatly. So we always hope that we will have a lot of say. There has been a few, there's trends that are going on around security, and maybe because we're a little bit less busy with all of the life things and commute and people and troubles of everyday life that are pre-pandemic, maybe there's a little bit more space to pay attention to those kind of globally not ignored but overlooked issues like let's focus on making this secure. Let's focus on taking care of your engineers and making sure that they are well and rested and happy, and they build good infrastructure for your services to run smoothly, generate money for you, so that everyone is happy.
Yeah,
but that's just hopes.
New, not issues, but new things to the forefront, and reprioritizes things, I guess.
Yeah.
For the good of like the function and people and everything, I think.
Definitely.
My final question then, what kind of trends in DevOps are you seeing at the moment that you're excited about, and what are you kind of hoping to see in the future?
One trend that, so I like, this question is very exciting. One trend that I find interesting and kind of promising and exciting is the trend of live data processing. And it's not obvious how is that directly related to DevOps, but the idea is that everything will become more data focused, and everything has to become more data focused, and we must learn to implement platforms that do kind of real-time data processing, so that we can do our jobs better, so that we can make data-driven decisions, the business can make data-driven decisions. And it's something that we still have a lot of work to do as an industry, because I've worked at Babylon a lot with our data tribe building the data platform, and what I noticed is the difference of communication and even the language that we use is so huge. And it made me think that we've spent about 10-15-ish years trying to bridge the gap between software developers and systems engineers, hence the whole DevOps industry. And we've kind of succeeded to an extent. We can now collaborate and understand each other and be on the same wave, and even the culture of SRE and having an SRE person in each development team, that's all good. Now we need to do the same with data engineering. So that's the next big thing that I'm seeing that we will have to embrace and make it happen.